She cast a dismissive glance, labeling him a nonentity before moving on. What she couldn't fathom was that he was the man meticulously compiling the evidence that would dismantle her career. They often said Judge Corliss Denham was a woman of efficiency, and that morning undeniably confirmed it. It was 9:06 a.m. on a brisk February Tuesday, and courtroom 2B in the Winnebago County Courthouse already crackled with impalpable tension, the kind that grips your chest before you even realize you're holding your breath. Attorneys rustled papers, the court clerk announced names without a flicker of acknowledgement. No niceties, just pure business. Judge Denham occupied her elevated bench as if sculpted into it. Early 60s sharp-featured, hair pulled back so severely it seemed to ache. She wore her judicial robes like an impenetrable shield, her pen tapping a rhythm that conveyed zero tolerance for delays, inquiries, or any hint of dissent. The next case on the docket, State of Illinois versus Clarissa Wynn. Her situation wasn't extraordinary, petty theft, second offense, minor property damage. But what unfolded next was anything but routine. From the second row, a man rose and approached the podium with deliberate composure. Mid to late 40s, neatly trimmed beard, a dark gray overcoat. No briefcase, no identification, just a small leather notebook in one hand. His voice was calm, measured. "Good morning, Your Honor, I'm Reuben Castle. I'm present as a procedural advisor to Mrs. Wynn. I've reviewed the..." Judge Denham cut him off, her eyes narrowing, leaning forward, lips a thin line. "And precisely who are you presumed to be?" Reuben paused, blinked once. "I'm assisting the defense." "Are you licensed to practice in this state?" she interjected, her voice rising, ensuring the gallery overheard. "No, ma'am, I'm not representing her in a legal capacity, but..." Denham waved her hand as if swatting in annoyance. "Then I have no interest in hearing from you. I have a courtroom full of legitimate attorneys awaiting. We haven't the time for nobodies squandering this court's resources." You could feel the room subtly shift. A few heads turned. A woman glanced up from her phone. The court reporter's fingers stilled for a second. Even the bailiff subtly adjusted his stance as if unsure whether to intervene. Reuben didn't react. He simply nodded once, retreated from the podium and settled into the last row. No discernible anger, no sharp retort. He opened his notebook, jotted something down, and remained silent for the duration of the hearing. Clarissa Wynn's case concluded in 3 minutes. Bail conditions reaffirmed, next case called. And just like that, Reuben was gone. No one saw him depart. He spoke to no one else. But his silence wasn't a retreat. It felt like a definitive choice. At the clerk's desk afterward, no one spoke aloud, but the unspoken thought lingered. That tone, that word, nobody. It felt unprofessional, deeply inappropriate. Something about it seemed to cling to the walls. One of the public defenders, a young woman named Lydia Crowley, murmured to her colleague, "She's going to regret that." Her colleague offered a look. Not agreement, not denial. Just that knowing raised eyebrow people give when they sense trouble brewing but prefer not to vocalize it. Judge Denham wielded considerable power, and such power was usually shielded until it simply couldn't be. But what no one in that courtroom knew, what Judge Denham certainly didn't know, was Reuben Castle's true identity. Reuben Castle wasn't one for impulsive reactions. He never raised his voice, never hurried his words. He was the type of man who grasped the profound weight of silence and the peril of underestimation. For most of his life, people had judged him by superficialities. Too quiet, too unremarkable, too courteous. But beneath that exterior resided a formidable intellect, honed by 2 decades of internal investigations, federal oversight, and observing powerful individuals unravel themselves. Reuben had been appointed Chief Inspector of Internal Judicial Affairs only 4 months prior. The role wasn't glamorous. No press conferences, no interviews, just a directive. Investigate reports of misconduct in Illinois courtrooms, discreetly, thoroughly, without warning. That morning in Rockford hadn't been arbitrary. Denham's courtroom had surfaced on his radar 6 times in 2 years. Not enough for a public outcry, just enough persistent whispers to suggest an anomaly. Anonymous complaints about her demeanor, her treatment of unrepresented defendants, particularly those of color. A tendency to interrupt, a habit of disparaging those without formal education. Nothing explosive, just a recurring pattern that smelled of smoke. So Reuben had driven from Springfield under an assumed name without a badge or assistant. He wanted to witness it firsthand, hear her words, observe her body language. He believed in truth, but he believed in verifiable proof even more. He'd arrived early, watched her enter. The bailiff seemed to stiffen as she passed. One of the public defenders whispered something about simply enduring the morning. The oppressive atmosphere in that room wasn't merely the winter chill. It emanated from her bench. When she labeled him a nobody, that was the confirmation he hadn't anticipated acquiring so swiftly. Yet Reuben didn't react as most would. He didn't demand deference. He didn't assert his position. That wasn't his method. He understood that power often unveiled itself most clearly when unobserved, and now he possessed it. Her own words, publicly uttered, recorded on the court's feed, witnessed by nearly a dozen legal professionals. By the time he returned to his car, he had already outlined the initial 3 bullet points of his report. He sat in the driver's seat, eyes fixed, engine still off. Verbal dismissal of procedural advisor without due cause. Use of the term nobody directed at a non-disruptive individual. Lack of professional inquiry into credentials before issuing public reprimand. He paused, then added, "Courtroom reaction indicates this is not an isolated incident." He didn't need to dramatize it. The facts would suffice. Later that afternoon, Reuben made 2 discreet phone calls. One to the oversight board, notifying them of a pending formal review. The other to a data analyst in his department named Bryn Ashford. Bryn was renowned for her ability to delve deep into digital archives and extract patterns from years of court footage and transcripts. Reuben asked her to compile everything available on Judge Corliss Denham's rulings. Transcripts, courtroom video, anything public and private that might reveal a pattern. He kept his voice level, simply stating, "Start from 7 years back. Flag every hearing with a self-represented defendant. Filter by race, gender, and sentencing length." Bryn paused. "Are we anticipating something significant?" Reuben took a breath, his eyes still on the notebook in his lap. "I believe we already have it on tape." But before anything could be formally filed or made official, he had to be certain. If Denham was what he suspected, the court system harbored a deeper rot than anyone cared to admit. Judge Corliss Denham's chambers weren't opulent. Just 2 large windows, an antiquated bookshelf crammed with outdated legal tomes, and a substantial wooden desk that predated her occupancy. Yet for her, that room was a sanctuary, a place where she could speak unfiltered, where formality dissolved and the robe came off. Figuratively if not literally. That afternoon, with court adjourned and the hallway emptying, she paced behind her desk, muttering as she flipped through the next day's schedule. 3 more public defenders tomorrow and another one of those TikTok attorneys. Can't wait. Her assistant, a soft-spoken woman in her early 30s named Valina Morse, stood quietly beside a filing cabinet, arms crossed. Valina had only been with the judge for 5 months, fresh out of law school. Sharp, eager, and still infused with idealism. She overheard things in that office she wasn't sure she should be hearing, but she took notes, nodded when expected, and kept to her lane. Today, however, something had shifted. Valina cleared her throat. "Judge, about that man from the Wynne hearing, Reuben Castle. Do we know who he was?" Denham waved her hand. "Some street paralegal trying to play courtroom hero. You heard how he introduced himself. Probably Googled a few legal terms and thought he'd test me." Valina hesitated. He didn't really interrupt, though. He was polite. Denham's eyes snapped up. "You think I was too harsh?" Valina didn't respond immediately. She looked at the bookshelf, then the carpet, then back at the judge. "I just think maybe calling him a nobody was too strong, especially in front of everyone." Denham leaned back in her chair and scoffed. "You're young. You think court is about fairness and feelings. It's not. It's about control. If I lose control in that room, I lose respect. And respect is the only thing keeping this system from eating itself alive." Valina didn't argue, but she didn't concur either. She gathered some paperwork and quietly exited, leaving the door slightly ajar. Down the hall, the bailiff, Jeremy Haskins, was sipping coffee at his post. As Valina passed, he gave her a look, not unkind, just knowing. "You're starting to see it too, huh?" Valina slowed. "What do you mean?" Jeremy exhaled through his nose and glanced toward the chambers. "She's been like this for years. Picks who she talks down to. Depends on the face, the tone, the shoes. You work with her long enough, you know when it's coming." Valina glanced around. "Does anyone report it?" He shook his head slowly. Some tried. Nothing sticks. He's smart. Never swears, never yells, never threatens. Just enough to make you feel small. Valina said nothing more, but as she walked back to her desk, she opened her laptop and typed a name into the search bar. Reuben Castle. What she discovered surprised her. A concise article tucked away in a legal newsletter. New appointment to Internal Judicial Affairs. Background in ethics investigation, federal auditing, procedural reform. Former assistant U.S. attorney. Married, no children. Known for discretion. She leaned back in her chair. That wasn't a street paralegal. That was someone with influence, someone who could make reports stick. Meanwhile, across town, Reuben sat at a hotel desk, laptop open, reviewing a courtroom transcript from 6 months ago. Denham had interrupted a defendant mid-sentence and issued a contempt warning for attitude. No profanity, no threats, just tone. He flagged the section and continued scrolling. But as Reuben connected the dots and Valina asked quiet questions, Judge Denham remained oblivious. The walls were already closing in. By Thursday morning, Judge Denham's courtroom operated on autopilot. She hadn't spared a thought for Reuben Castle since his departure. In her mind, he was just another eccentric attempting to inject influence into a space that demanded structure. But elsewhere, the pieces were rapidly aligning. At precisely 8 a.m., Reuben hit send on a confidential file upload from his hotel room. The contents: a preliminary findings report, 3 flagged video clips, and a request for full archival access to Courtroom 2B's audio transcripts dating back 7 years. The system pinged twice, confirming receipt. By 9 a.m., Bryn Ashford, his analyst back in Springfield, had already combed through 86 separate hearing logs linked to Judge Denham. She hadn't stopped working since his call. Her screen glowed with color-coded notes, statistical overlays, and audio tags. She called Reuben. So far, 17 flagged cases where the judge interrupted non-attorney speakers in under 10 seconds. 14 of those were Black or Latino. Reuben didn't respond immediately. Bryn continued. She speaks 22% fewer words in hearings with non-white defendants. Her tone is more aggressive. I pulled sample transcripts for comparison. With white defendants or private attorneys, she's civil, methodical. With everyone else, she cuts, mocks, redirects. It's all in the data. Reuben rubbed his chin. Any written complaints? 3 formal, 7 anonymous. One even mentioned her calling someone irrelevant. Bryn paused. But guess what name showed up in one of them? Castle? Nope. Valina Morse. She filed a vague statement last week. Didn't name Denham, but it was clear. Reuben closed his laptop and stood by the hotel window. Outside, snow began to fall, thick flakes against the glass. She's paying attention, he said. At the courthouse, Valina was more than paying attention. She was scrutinizing her own desk as if it might betray her. That morning she'd received an email from a private account. No signature, just a line. You're not wrong. Be ready. She didn't know the sender, but it unsettled her more than she let on. Meanwhile, Judge Denham was presiding over a pretrial conference involving a single mother facing eviction fraud. The woman was soft-spoken, hands trembling as she attempted to explain a missed filing deadline. Denham cut her off within 40 seconds, chastising her for playing games with the system. The public defender winced. And Reuben? He watched the feed from his laptop. The entire session was being streamed internally as part of the pilot transparency program for judicial accountability. Denham hadn't recalled that detail, few judges ever did. He clicked the timestamp and noted, mocking tone during hardship testimony. No clear attempt to listen. He added it to the report. By afternoon, the review team in Springfield had sufficient grounds to escalate. A formal inquiry was quietly initiated as protocol required. But it meant 2 things. Judge Denham would be notified within 2 hours, and an on-site evaluation team would be dispatched to observe proceedings under the guise of a training review. Reuben knew what would follow. Most judges either moderated their behavior or became defensive, but Denham, he wasn't sure yet. That evening he called Bryn again. If you were me, he asked, would you walk back into her courtroom next week? Bryn didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Let her show you who she is again. Reuben offered a faint smile. That's the plan. But Denham was about to discover she hadn't just insulted a man. She'd activated a system designed to hold individuals like her accountable. Friday morning arrived, bringing with it more than just a cold wind. It brought scrutiny. It began subtly. A local blog operated by a retired journalist named Stan Bairden posted a grainy courtroom still alongside a few bold lines. Judge refers to black advisor as nobody during hearing. Who was he really? No sensationalism, no embellishment, just facts. But it was enough. By noon, the article had been shared nearly 800 times. A civil rights group in Peoria reposted it with a sharp caption. It's 2025 and this is how courtrooms still treat black professionals. The story disseminated rapidly, faster than anyone inside the courthouse had anticipated. Judge Denham first learned of it when her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Judge Orrin Bexley. "You're in the news. Call me." He didn't. Instead, she opened her laptop and found the article herself. Her face froze mid-sentence, eyes narrowed. Below it, a short paragraph confirming that Reuben Castle was, in fact, the Chief Inspector of Internal Judicial Affairs. She stared at the screen, the color slowly draining from her face. Across the hall, Valina tried to remain inconspicuous, but whispers filled the hallway, the clerk's office. Even Jeremy, the bailiff, had turned his phone face down and wasn't smiling as usual. Inside a nearby break room, two public defenders, one Latino, one white, stood near the coffee machine trading low murmurs. "He's not just auditing," one said. "He's here for her. I heard she's already under formal review." "Good," said the other. "Should have happened a long time ago." By 2 p.m. the story had reached regional outlets. Local radio hosts were discussing it too. One host, Tamara Green, opened her segment with a clipped recording of the hearing. Denham's voice filled the car radios of hundreds of listeners. "We don't have time for nobodies wasting this court's resources." No context, no tone, just those words. By late afternoon the protesters arrived. Just a handful at first, with signs reading "Dignity and Justice" and "Accountability Now." By 5 p.m., nearly 24 people stood outside the courthouse in heavy coats, holding thermoses and small battery-powered speakers playing audio from past hearings. A man who'd once represented himself in Denham's court delivered a short speech from a crate, his voice cracking from the cold. "I didn't think anyone would believe me back then. But now hearing her say that out loud, I feel seen." Reuben wasn't among the crowd, but he watched the live stream from his hotel. He took notes, not on the protest but on the public response. He believed in systems, but he believed in people even more. People had to compel the system to move. Inside her office, Denham sat motionless, blinds drawn, desk clear. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call. She answered with a sharp tone. "This is Denham." On the other end, a senior administrator from the Oversight Board. "Judge Denham," the voice said, cool and formal, "we're notifying you of an official audit into courtroom conduct, case management and language used during proceedings over the past 7 years. You'll receive documentation by Monday. Until then, please prepare for temporary observation by board members starting next week." She didn't respond immediately. The voice continued. "Also, per protocol, your staff has the right to request reassignment during the review period." Denham sat in silence. In the next room, Valina packed her tote bag without a word. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she wouldn't be standing beside the bench on Monday. But what Denham failed to grasp even now was that this wasn't merely a political inconvenience. It was deeply personal, for Reuben, for the community, and for every person she'd silenced without a second thought. Monday arrived with a palpable heaviness. A tension permeated the courthouse that no one could name but everyone felt. Fewer greetings in the hall, doors remaining closed longer, eyes darting away a second too quickly. Judge Denham entered through the side door, coat pressed, expression neutral, but the confidence that usually enveloped her like a second robe, it was gone. In courtroom 2B, 3 individuals sat in the second row. Not reporters, not clerks, but observers from the Judicial Review Board. One of them was Reuben Castle. He didn't wear a suit that day, just a simple dark sweater, quiet shoes, no briefcase. Yet he still stood out. His mere presence was enough. Denham immediately registered him upon entering. She hesitated for half a second before sitting, and it didn't go unnoticed. The first 2 hearings proceeded with robotic precision. She allowed attorneys to speak without interruption. She used phrases like, "Thank you for clarifying," And let's make sure we understand fully. A few of the regulars looked around, confused. But by the third case the facade fractured. The defendant, a young man named Terrell Gaines, was nervous. He stuttered through his answers. His public defender requested a continuance due to delayed documentation. A common request, nothing out of the ordinary. Denham paused, lips pressed thin. The courtroom fell silent, waiting. And then she slipped. "This is the second time you've asked for more time. This is a courtroom, not a daycare." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Someone shifted in their seat. Reuben wrote something down. The public defender responded calmly, "Your Honor, I just remind the court that discovery was delayed by the prosecution." Denham straightened, her tone tighter. "I'm aware. Let's proceed." It wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. It was enough to show she couldn't help herself. After the hearing, the observers rose. Reuben didn't utter a word. He simply nodded to the clerk and stepped into the hallway. Denham didn't look at him until 3 hours later, when she was summoned into a closed-door conference room on the second floor. Inside, a long table, 2 board members, a legal ethics officer, and Reuben Castle. She walked in slowly, her shoes quiet against the tile. When she sat, no one spoke at first. Then Reuben looked up from his folder. "Judge Denham," he began as calm as ever, "do you recall referring to a court participant last Tuesday as a nobody?" She didn't answer immediately. "I remember someone trying to insert themselves into court procedure without standing," she said. "I handled it as I saw fit." Reuben nodded once. "And did you verify who I was before making that decision?" She blinked. Her throat moved, but no words came. Reuben leaned forward slightly. "Because I wasn't there to test you. I wasn't there to provoke you. I was there because your courtroom had been flagged for repeat concerns. I came with no assumptions. I waited to see for myself." He paused. "And I did." Silently, one of the board members added, "We've reviewed 42 hearings. The pattern is clear. Disproportionate interruptions, inconsistent tone, language that crosses into public humiliation. Your record is under scrutiny, Judge Denham." Denham's hands were clasped together on the table, still silent. Reuben continued, his voice still calm. "You've had control in that room for a long time. But control without fairness isn't justice. It's performance." For the first time in a long time, Corliss Denham had no rebuttal. But what she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that a single word, one careless moment, had opened a door that wouldn't close quietly. The board didn't prolong it. By Thursday, a formal statement had been released. Judge Corliss Denham would be placed on administrative suspension pending a full disciplinary hearing. The announcement came not through headlines or social media, but via a quiet press release on the Oversight Board's official site. Still, people found it. A local news station ran a short segment that night. They showed a still of Denham walking briskly out of the courthouse, face tight, flanked by her attorney. No words, just footage. And then they cut to Reuben Castle giving a short interview outside the building. He didn't speak like a man seeking to destroy someone. He spoke like a man weary of witnessing the same script unfold. "No one enjoys holding others accountable," Reuben said, his tone steady. "But when someone holds authority in a room where people come for justice, they have to treat every person with dignity, whether that person wears a suit, a uniform, or a second-hand coat. Justice doesn't measure your title, it measures your character." That quote made it to social media. It didn't go viral, but it didn't need to. It resonated. Meanwhile, inside her home on the north side of town, Denham stared at the television with the volume turned down. She sat on the edge of her couch, still in her court shoes, one heel dangling off the edge of her foot. The phone hadn't rung all day, not from friends, not from colleagues. No one had her back now. The silence around her wasn't peace, it was consequence. She walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. A half-empty bottle of aspirin sat by the sink. She hadn't slept much, couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes she saw Reuben's face. Not angry, not smug, just still, just certain. The hearing was still weeks away. She had time to construct a defense, time to spin it. But deep down she knew. She hadn't merely slipped once. She hadn't said something she didn't mean. That moment with Reuben, the word nobody, that was precisely who she'd been for years, unchecked. Back downtown, Reuben stood in front of a different courtroom now, a smaller one. He was speaking to a group of law interns about judicial behavior. His voice was calm, but each word landed with purpose. Here's the truth. Bias doesn't always wear a hood or carry a flag. Sometimes it sits behind a bench. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it speaks softly. But it always leaves marks. One of the interns raised a hand. Do you think Judge Denham meant it, or was it just a moment of stress? Reuben looked at her. I don't care if she meant it, he said. I care that she said it without hesitation. That tells me everything I need to know. He closed his notebook and glanced toward the window. Every time someone walks into a courtroom, they bring their entire story with them. Trauma, fear, hope, everything. You have no idea what that moment means for them. Don't be the reason they stop believing the system can work. After the session, Reuben stepped outside, took a long breath, and let the winter air hit his face. He wasn't ecstatic, but he was at peace. He didn't want her destroyed. He didn't need headlines. What he always wanted was change. But as words spread and conversations ignited in courtrooms across the state, it became clear. This wasn't just about one judge. It was a potent reminder, a line in the sand. And perhaps, just perhaps, someone else would think twice before speaking carelessly from the bench. By the time spring arrived, the energy in Rockford's legal circles had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks or sweeping reforms overnight. But people began speaking openly. Clerks conversed with more confidence. Public defenders felt less compelled to brace for battle. And for the first time in a long while, some defendants walked into courtroom 2B and didn't feel as though the walls were pressing in on them. Judge Corliss Denham never returned to the bench. Her resignation preceded the official hearing. No press conference, no apology, just a formal letter to the board citing personal reasons and a desire to step back from public service. Those closest to her understood its true meaning. She wasn't forced out. She stepped down before she could be formally removed. Pride even in retreat. Valina Morse, her former assistant, accepted a clerkship with the appellate court in St. Louis. She departed Rockford quietly, but not before sending Reuben a handwritten note. Thank you for making someone listen. He kept the note folded in the back of his notebook, next to his list of flagged courtrooms across the state. Reuben didn't celebrate. He moved on to the next city, the next courtroom, the next whisper of misconduct. That was the job, quiet work, essential work. But this one lingered with him longer than most. Not because of the scandal, not because of the headlines, but because of what it illuminated. That sometimes all it takes to penetrate arrogance is a quiet voice with the authority to document things and compel people to listen. Months later, he delivered a guest lecture at a law school in Bloomington. A student asked him what initially drew him to judicial oversight. Reuben pondered for a second before answering. When I was a kid, he said, my cousin got sentenced to a year in jail for breaking a store window. The judge barely looked at him, didn't even ask for a statement, just called him a statistic, and moved on. That stayed with me. I didn't become a lawyer to win. I became one to watch. Because when people know someone's watching, they behave differently. He looked around the room. And when they think no one's watching, that's when you see who they really are. That line resonated with the students long after the lecture concluded. Back in Rockford, the courthouse continued its daily grind. Hearings resumed, new judges took the bench. But one thing had irrevocably changed. Awareness. The pervasive feeling that someone might be listening, watching, writing. That alone was sufficient to make some reconsider before cutting someone off or speaking down. And for those who had sat in that courtroom for years, heads bowed, voices silenced, this moment mattered. Because someone had finally articulated it. Respect isn't earned by the robe you wear, but by the way you treat the people who walk into your courtroom with nothing but their voice. Sometimes justice doesn't bang a gavel. It sits quietly, takes notes, and waits for the right moment to speak. If this story made you pause, made you think, or reminded you that every word matters, consider subscribing. We've got more stories coming. Real ones, challenging ones, the kind that provoke thought about power, dignity, and each other.